Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today I thought we'd do a really fun video on the economics of going viral. And this comes off the back of watching the Bonnie Blue documentary and then having lots of fun discussions about it. Every time you see a YouTuber, a TikToker, or an OnlyFanser buying a mansion or getting some exuberant paycheck, we are seeing an extreme version of a bigger economic problem: the rise of the winner takes all markets. Now, these markets tend to reward just a small proportion of people with almost all of the money. In a normal market, if you're 10% better than somebody, you would expect that to be reflected in your pay by receiving maybe around 10% better pay. Unfortunately, and where the problem lies, is in the winner takes all markets. What we tend to find is somebody that is even just slightly better, or actually what we're tending to find is actually just even a little bit luckier. They tend to get rewarded with something like 100 times more of the pay. Now, we all know that attention online is scarce. Algorithms tend to just boost a few individuals, and because they're being boosted, they tend to get more views. If your pay is related to views, then by this alone, you get paid more. And also, following this, then we tend to find the brands flock to them. Because of this, what we then find is the gap between number one and number two isn't small anymore, it's a canyon. Now, why is this potentially a problem, and why does this go against what economic theory would dictate? So, economic theory kind of dictates that we should be paid in proportion to our skill. However, in these kind of markets, what we're tending to find is the link between pay and skill is broken. What we're tending to find is that in these type of markets, big paydays or big payouts are often linked to things such as luck, timing, or visibility, as opposed to being the best. So this means then having a high income isn't necessarily linked to being a genius. Now, why am I using that word? It's because this word was used multiple times in the Bonnie Blue documentary, and you can see it's also written in one of the write-ups, as I'm showing here. And this isn't new to me. I tend to find that it's quite a common word to be given to people that are being paid well. So, for example, I've seen instances of Donald Trump being called a genius. I also think that he potentially wouldn't have been even voted in as president if he didn't have such a high net worth, even though I would argue that it doesn't really come down to his skill because most of it was inherited. There are also other instances on this. There was that young boy that used to record himself playing video games. Now, could you argue that that's a high skill set? I wouldn't personally, but I'll be open for somebody to try and change my mind. Yet he amassed something like 17 million YouTube followers or subscribers, and obviously made a lot of money out of it. But could you argue that's high skill? Now, why am I bringing this up, and why is this potentially a problem? So my biggest concern here is this misallocation of talent. I'm really, really worried that society is going to end up with too many people chasing what I will call low probability wins, and there'll be too few people in society going for the essential but modest paying jobs. Why is this a worry of mine, and why do I think it is very real? It's very much today's problem. It's because of the discussions that you're hearing around when people are talking about kind of future careers now. They are seeing these people online making these big paychecks, and they're thinking they're the things that they need, they're the careers they need to go for. Whereas if they actually looked at the stats of the amount of people that try these careers out, they're not making anywhere near the amount of money as the top one or two people. And it's due to this idea of the winner takes all market. So why is it, do you think, that we are so quick to call people that earn a lot of money a genius? Well, I think there's a term for this, and I would call it the halo effect. As society, we see that success in one domain, for some reason, makes us think that this person would be kind of successful or do well in all domains. Secondly, I think that we've got this kind of cultural narrative where we love a good success story and we love to attribute it to hard work. We don't like this idea of randomness. So we try and say it's got to be because they had some kind of innate ability, they were a genius, or they were just really hardworking, over the fact that it was random and they got lucky. I don't think randomness sits well with us as human beings. And I think it's because we like to be able to have this idea that we control our own outcome or we control our own fate. If I put in the effort, it will get rewarded. And if I don't, it won't. If it's down to just luck, then that's uncertainty, and us as human beings don't like that. There's definitely this meritocracy myth. I think that earnings are seen as a proof of worth or intelligence or even insight. So in economics, this is what we'd call a signal. We're using earnings as a signal for these factors. I disagree there. I don't think that link is clear cut as we make it out to be. But I definitely think that's the way society is going, and that could potentially be quite damaging. So let's try and formalize this a bit better then. Let's write down what would happen in your typical kind of classical economics and what's actually happening in a winner takes all reality.
If we take both the classical economics and the winner takes all reality and break this down, I think we would have the following. Starting with classical economics, what is the underlying assumption here? Because in economic models, we love an assumption. So the underlying assumption here is that your pay matches your marginal productivity. So this is your value you're adding to the economy. And what's the mechanism for this? Well, I think it's the following. If you are higher skilled, this leads to higher productivity, so higher output, for example, and it's because of that you get rewarded and therefore you have higher pay. I think this is always a lot easier to imagine in kind of like in a piece rate setting. So for example, if you got paid for how many apples you were picking, if you picked more apples and you're getting paid per apple, then you get a higher pay overall. Obviously this isn't as clear cut when maybe you're in a job that is providing a service or something else, but I still think that this mechanism holds true. People realise how skilled you are and that you have a higher productivity, and they compensate you with a higher pay. And we're going to assume that kind of these job markets or these jobs are highly competitive, and this helps then keep the pay aligned with your actual output. An example of this would be a surgeon earning more than the cashier, and the argument would be, well, it takes more skill, it takes more time to become a surgeon than it does a cashier, and therefore you compensate them with a higher pay. But then also within kind of surgeons itself, perhaps there's this kind of competitive structure, which means that if you're a better surgeon, you get better pay. Maybe that works better in the private sector than it does in kind of the NHS. But the underlying kind of like base is there. So what goes on in a winner takes all reality then? So the underlying assumption for the winner takes all reality that I think is at play here is that pay often reflects attention capture. So if you can capture attention, it has knock-on effects and therefore you get more pay than proportional skill. And I'm not saying that you have to be potentially really skilled to capture attention. So what's the mechanism here? Well, if you have a slight advantage or you have a lucky break, this will lead to your huge exposure, and it's the huge exposure that is paying you. There's something called network effects. Basically, this is the idea, and we see this with a lot of people, but it's really clear in the case of Bonnie Blue. We see that these large audiences start to attract more coverage. So, for example, Bonnie Blue got offered her own documentary. But not only that, then they get offered maybe to collab with even more famous people, and they get sponsorships, and this then locks in your dominance. So it helps keep the top players on top. And this is important because I think if we say it's like luck or it's a lucky break, that doesn't help to explain initially why they can continue to be on top. But I think this mechanism through network effects does help with that. And then what we're finding as a result of that is that the returns are massively skewed towards a few. An example of this would be if you think about Bonnie Blue, well, she's renowned for being on OnlyFans. I think she has been banned now. But anyway, she was renowned for being on OnlyFans, and she was making something like well, I think at one point she was aiming for a couple of million a month, but like 500,000 a month. Well, when I looked into this, there's actually 4% of British women, so 4% of young British women have creator accounts on OnlyFans. And I cannot think of kind of many other famous names than I can for Bonnie Blue, which kind of signals to me that they haven't had this kind of publicity, and therefore they're probably not capturing as much attention, and they're probably not, well, I would say definitely not getting as much money as Bonnie Blue, and probably not even close. So I think this helps to really formalise and put it down better, kind of the difference between what we'd expect versus what's kind of happening when people go viral.
Having said all of that, and I just find this incredibly interesting to think about. How would we change this? Because we also don't know where the responsibility lies. It's obviously, on some level, the responsibility does lie with the platform itself, because they've obviously got this kind of incentive or this pay structure in place. But then maybe as well, there's something to be said for us as a society, and I'm not too sure where to go with that, but it's just something to be kind of left open as a food for thought. But if you take anything away from this, the key message would be that the thing that you see online or on social media or on TV, because they then get given their own programs, is these kind of the earnings that they're receiving really is a low probability win. So if you went and did the same thing, it's actually very highly unlikely that the same outcome would happen for you. So if that gives you any more confidence to be happy with your kind of modest but very, very essential day-to-day job, then please take that away from this video. Bye, guys.